Most people think the danger starts when the microwave turns on. Usually it doesn't. More often, the real mistake happened earlier, quietly, hours before anyone thought there was a problem. It happened when the food sat on the counter too long, when it cooled too slowly, when it was stored too warm, or when someone decided to hit it with intense heat all over again, even though it had already been cooked once. And that is exactly why leftover food has become such a strange source of fear. Ask around, and you will hear the same warnings over and over. Never reheat rice. Chicken becomes toxic the second time. Spinach turns carcinogenic if you heat it twice. Eggs should never be reheated under any circumstances. The problem is, those warnings sound simple. Science usually isn't. And in this case, the truth is much more precise than the myths. In some ways, it is also much more surprising. Because when food safety researchers and public health agencies look at leftovers, they are not asking one vague question like, can this food be reheated? They ask better questions. How long did it spend in the danger zone? Will it reheat evenly? And is this a gentle warm-up? Or another blast of high heat that changes the chemistry of the food? Those three questions explain almost everything. So instead of repeating kitchen folklore, let's pull this apart properly. Rice, chicken, leafy greens, eggs, 4 foods that keep showing up in leftover panic, 4 myths people repeat with total confidence, and one pattern underneath all of them. Because by the end of this, the most important rule will have almost nothing to do with the food itself. It comes down to time, temperature, and one invisible window where a safe meal can quietly stop being safe. Before we go any further, this is not based on internet rumor. The guidance here comes from the USDA, the FDA, the World Health Organization, the UK Food Standards Agency, the Dutch Food Safety Authority, the National Cancer Institute, and peer-reviewed research on food safety and high-temperature cooking. And once you line all of that up, a clear picture starts to emerge. Food safety usually isn't lost in one dramatic moment. It slips away gradually, silently, often while the food still looks perfectly normal. The USDA calls 40 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit the danger zone. That is the range where bacteria can multiply quickly. The WHO gives the same warning in Celsius. Keep cold food below 5 degrees Celsius. Keep hot food above 60. And do not leave cooked food at room temperature for more than 2 hours. That is the first mechanism. Microbial growth. Not myth. Not mystery. Just biology doing what biology does. Then there is the second mechanism. Uneven heating. This matters more than people think. A microwave can make the outside of a dish feel hot, while cooler pockets sit hidden in the middle. The USDA specifically warns about these cold spots and recommends covering the food, rotating it, and checking the temperature in multiple places. So even when something feels hot, part of it may not actually be hot enough. And then there is the third mechanism, which is where a lot of online advice goes off the rails. High temperature chemistry. Yes, harmful compounds can form in food. That part is real, but they are much more strongly linked to intense heat, frying, broiling, grilling, charring, repeated browning, than to a careful, normal reheat. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Because once you understand those 3 mechanisms, a lot of forbidden food myths start to collapse. Let's start with rice. Rice has one of the worst reputations in the leftover world, and unlike some food myths, this one does have a real scientific reason behind it. But the reason is not what most people think. The issue with rice is not that reheating it makes it toxic. The issue is Bacillus cereus. FoodSafety.gov lists Bacillus cereus as a foodborne bacterium associated especially with rice and leftovers, along with sauces, soups, and prepared foods that have been left out too long at room temperature. Here's why rice shows up so often in that warning. Raw rice can contain spores. Cooking can kill active bacteria, but spores are harder to eliminate. And if cooked rice sits out too long, those spores can germinate. Bacteria can multiply, and toxins can form. That is the real problem. And here is the part people often miss. If toxins have already formed, reheating does not undo the damage. The microwave is not a reset button. It is not a time machine. It cannot reverse hours of bad storage. That changes the whole story, doesn't it? Because people love to blame the last visible step. They see someone reheat rice and assume the reheating is what made it dangerous. But in many cases, the risky moment happened long before that. while the rice was sitting on the counter, cooling too slowly, spending too much time in the danger zone. So if rice was left out for half the evening, then refrigerated late, the problem did not begin the next day when it was warmed up. It began the night before, and that is why the scientific message is more useful than the myth. Science does not say never reheat rice. Science says rice needs to be handled correctly from the moment it is cooked. The USDA says leftovers should be refrigerated within 2 hours, or within 1 hour if the temperature is above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Rice should ideally be cooled in shallow containers so it chills faster. And when it is reheated, it should be reheated thoroughly until it is steaming hot. So the real conclusion is not that reheated rice is dangerous. It is that rice is unforgiving when mishandled, and that is a very different warning. But rice is only the beginning, because once people move from food poisoning to chemistry, the myths become even more dramatic. Chicken is where that shift usually happens. This is the point where people stop saying unsafe and start saying carcinogenic. And once that word enters the conversation, precision tends to disappear very quickly. You will often hear that reheated chicken becomes carcinogenic. It sounds alarming. It sounds scientific, but it is a sloppy way to describe what the evidence actually says. Here is what the National Cancer Institute says. Heterocyclic amines, or HCAs, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs, are formed when muscle meats, including poultry, beef, pork, and fish, are cooked using high-temperature methods such as pan-frying or grilling directly over an open flame. HC. As form when amino acids, sugars, and creatine-related compounds react at high temperatures. PAHs form when fat and juices drip onto a hot surface or flame, creating smoke that sticks to the meat. Notice what is driving the risk, not the fact that the meat is a leftover, not the fact that it spent one night in the refrigerator, and not the simple fact that it is being warmed up the next day. The main driver is intense heat. That means if someone takes already cooked chicken and aggressively refries it, rebrowns it, chars the edges again, or keeps hammering it with high heat until it is dry and smoking, then yes, they are moving back into the kind of chemistry researchers pay attention to. But that is not the same thing as a careful reheat. And here's the part almost nobody mentions. The National Cancer Institute also notes that microwaving meat before exposing it to high heat can substantially reduce HCA formation because it reduces the time the meat spends in contact with that high heat. That is a remarkable detail because it flips the usual story on its head. The microwave is often treated like the villain in these warnings. Yet, in this context, it can actually help reduce exposure to the compounds people claim to be worried about, assuming the food is then handled properly. So, what is the wrong way to reheat chicken? Not the existence of reheating itself. The bigger mistake is treating reheating like a second round of cooking, browning it again, crisping it again, charring it again, drying it out in the name of making sure. That isn't reheating, that is recooking. The better approach is much less dramatic. Reheat gently, cover the food so it holds moisture, add a little liquid if needed, heat it only until it reaches a safe temperature. The USDA guideline for leftovers is 165 degrees Fahrenheit. Not because the food needs to be punished, because the center needs to get hot enough and evenly enough to be safe. And once you see that, the chicken myth starts to look less like science and more like a misunderstanding built around one scary word. But the next myth may be the most persistent of all because it uses real chemistry in the most misleading possible way. Spinach, and more broadly, nitrate-rich vegetables. This warning spreads so easily because part of it is true. Yes, leafy greens like spinach, lettuce, rocket, beetroot, and celery can naturally be high in nitrates. Yes, nitrates can be converted in the body into nitrites. And yes, under certain conditions, nitrites can contribute to the formation of nitrosamines, some of which are associated with cancer risk. That much is real. But this is where people take one step too far. They hear the word nitrate and suddenly put vegetables and processed meat in the same category. They are not the same category. Not even close. The UK Food Standards Agency explains why this comparison breaks down. Vegetables come with vitamin C, polyphenols, fiber, and other compounds that help reduce the formation of harmful nitrosamines. Processed meats are different. They contain proteins and amino compounds that behave differently, especially during curing and high-temperature cooking. In other words, the chemistry does not happen in isolation. The whole food matters. That is one reason processed meat is linked to increased colorectal cancer risk, while diets rich in vegetables are consistently associated with better health outcomes. Same word, very different context. And this is where one of the internet's favorite leftover warnings starts to unravel. The Dutch Food Safety Authority explicitly states that if nitrate-rich vegetables are cooled quickly after cooking and refrigerated immediately, they can be reheated later without increasing nitrite content. That one sentence clears up a huge amount of confusion, because science is not saying never reheat spinach. It is saying something much more practical. Handle spinach properly. Do not cook it. Leave it warm for hours, cool it slowly, and then assume the next day's reheat is harmless. That is poor food handling. But if it is cooled quickly, refrigerated promptly, and reheated properly, the blanket claim that reheated spinach automatically becomes dangerous is simply not supported the way people keep presenting it. So, once again, the real issue is not mystical toxicity. It is the chain of handling. And that should tell you something important about how food myths spread. A lot of what sounds like chemistry panic is really just time and temperature failure wearing scientific language. And that brings us to eggs, another category wrapped in confident warnings and very little precision. People say reheated eggs are toxic. They say the protein structure becomes dangerous. They say the yolk somehow turns harmful. They say microwaving an egg dish the next day is something you should never do. The FDA says otherwise. According to FDA guidance, cooked eggs in egg dishes may be refrigerated for serving later and should be thoroughly reheated to 165 degrees Fahrenheit before serving. The FDA also says leftover cooked egg dishes should be refrigerated and used within 3 to 4 days, and hot egg-containing leftovers should be divided into shallow containers so they cool quickly. That is the evidence-based answer. Can egg dishes lose quality when reheated? Absolutely. Scrambled eggs can turn rubbery. A quiche can dry out. Texture can suffer fast. But bad texture is not the same thing as bad safety. And that distinction matters because people often confuse disappointment with danger. The real risks with eggs are much less mysterious than the myths make them sound. Undercooking them in the first place, leaving them out too long after cooking, cooling a large egg dish too slowly, reheating it unevenly, or warming it until it feels hot on the surface, while the center stays cooler than it should be. By now, the pattern should be impossible to ignore. Rice, chicken, spinach, eggs, 4 foods, 4 myths, and the same lesson keeps showing up in different disguises. Most reheating problems are not caused by reheating itself. They come from what happened before reheating, how the reheating is done, and whether the food is being gently warmed or dragged back into the kind of intense heat that changes its chemistry all over again. So, let's bring this together clearly. If you remember only one thing from this video, make it this. The most important question is not, can I reheat this food? The better question is, how was this food cooled, stored, and reheated? That is the line between science and superstition. Rice is not risky because it was reheated. It becomes risky when spores are given time to grow and produce toxins before reheating ever happens. Chicken is not dangerous because it spent one night in the fridge. The bigger chemical concern comes from repeated exposure to high-temperature browning, charring, grilling, and frying, not from a careful, moist reheat to a safe internal temperature. Spinach is not the same as processed meat just because both involve the word nitrate. Vegetables come packaged with protective compounds, and properly cooled nitrate-rich vegetables can be reheated later without the automatic nitrite increase people keep warning about online. And eggs are not forbidden leftovers. The FDA explicitly allows cooked eggs in egg dishes to be refrigerated and reheated safely, provided they are handled correctly. So, what are the real rules? They are not dramatic. They are not mysterious. And that may be exactly why they get ignored. Refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours, or within 1 hour if the surrounding temperature is very hot. Use shallow containers so large amounts of food cool faster. Keep your refrigerator cold enough, below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, according to USDA guidance, and preferably below 5 degrees Celsius, according to WHO guidance. Do not keep leftovers in the refrigerator indefinitely. As a general USDA rule, use them within 3 to 4 days. When reheating, bring leftovers to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. For soups, sauces, and gravies, bring them to a boil. And if you are using a microwave, cover the food, rotate it, and check the temperature in more than one place, because cold spots are real. And there is one more distinction worth holding on to. Do not confuse reheating with recooking. The more you treat leftovers like a chance to fry, brown, crisp, char, or smoke the food all over again, the more you move away from simple warming and back toward high-temperature chemistry. That is where a lot of bad advice begins. What makes this topic frustrating is not that the science is unclear. In many ways, it is surprisingly clear. What is unclear is the way people talk about it. Never reheat this. Never touch that. This food is toxic now. That food causes cancer now. The problem with those slogans is not just that they are imprecise. It is that they make people worse at judging real risk. They throw away perfectly safe food because of myths, and then keep genuinely risky leftovers because nobody ever explained what actually changes the danger. That is backwards. Good health information should leave people less confused, not more. It should help people recognize what raises risk and what only sounds frightening when stripped of context. Because once advice becomes vague enough, two things usually happen. Some people panic, everyone else tunes out, and neither response makes a kitchen safer. So the next time you open your refrigerator and stare at yesterday's leftovers, don't ask the internet's favorite question. Don't ask whether this is one of the forbidden foods. Ask the better questions. How long has it been here? How was it cooled? Was it stored cold enough? And if I reheat it now, will it be heated evenly and only as much as needed? That is what science actually says. And once you understand that, leftovers stop feeling like superstition. They start feeling like a system that is simple, practical, and much less frightening than the myths make it sound. So now I'm curious, which warning have you heard the most? The rice warning, the chicken warning, the spinach warning, or the idea that reheated eggs should never be touched? And more importantly, which one did you believe? Because that is the strange thing about food myths. They do not spread because they are precise. They spread because they are memorable. But memorable is not the same as true. And in a kitchen, that difference matters. As always, this video is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not personal medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Food safety guidance can evolve as new evidence emerges, so if you have a specific medical condition, a pregnancy-related concern, or a higher infection risk, speak with your physician or a qualified dietitian for advice tailored to you. Because in the end, food safety is not about memorizing taboos. It is about understanding the few invisible rules that actually protect you. And once you see those rules clearly, the fear starts to disappear.